TWA 800, center.
I think that was him.
I think so.
God bless him.
It was a humid Wednesday evening on July 17, 1996. A Boeing 747 had departed JFK Airport and flying towards the DeGaulle Airport in Paris, France. It would become one of the most infamous flights in aviation history. We now know this flight as the Transworld Airlines Flight 800. As a commercial flight, the plane was carrying 2 pilots, 2 flight engineers, 14 flight attendants, and 212 passengers, all of whom would not survive. From the moment the aircraft took off to when it flew over the Atlantic Ocean near East Moriches, New York, there was not a single alarming incident that warranted concern, bar a delay caused by a potential passenger and baggage mismatch. That is, until Flight 800's signal disappeared. A plane disappearing mid-flight is chilling no matter the circumstances, but the panic was only intensified when Flight 800 failed to respond to communication attempts. Air traffic controllers then decided to contact nearby aircrafts in hopes for an update, but what they heard next shocked them. The captain of a nearby aircraft reported that he had just seen an explosion in the air over the Atlantic Ocean near East Moriches, New York. He stated that a fireball was descending towards the ocean and debris was raining from the sky. With speculations ranging from terrorist missiles to lightning strikes, keep watching to find out why we still cannot confirm with certainty what happened on the mysterious Flight 800. TWA Flight 800 was a scheduled flight from JFK International Airport in New York to Charles de Gaulle International Airport in Paris, France. The flight was delayed, however, due to a disabled piece of ground equipment and a potential passenger and baggage mismatch. Commanding the flight was Captain Kevorkian, 58, directly hired by TWA. His most recent FAA first-class airman certificate noted a requirement for glasses for near vision. At the time of the incident, Captain Kevorkian has logged over 18,000 flight hours, with 5,490 of those in the Boeing 747. The Czech airman of Flight 800 was Steven Snyder, and he was 57 years old by the time of the incident. He also held a first-class airman medical certificate without any restrictions or limitations. By the time of the incident, the Czech airman had flown approximately 17,000 total flight hours, 4,700 of those hours spent in the Boeing 747. The accident aircraft had 93,303 total flight hours and was valued by insurance companies at $11 million. At 20:07, the Boeing 747 taxied down the runway, and by 2019 they successfully took off. At 20:29, the cockpit voice recorder recorded the captain stating, "Look at that crazy fuel flow indicator there on the number 4. See that?" Following protocol, Boston's air traffic control instructs TWA 800 to ascend to 15,000 feet. The captain then stated with a calm, "Climb thrust," and 10 seconds later the flight engineer responded by saying, "Power set." This conversation essentially showed that the captain was authorized to climb the aircraft to 15,000 feet and responded with his understanding. In the next 30 seconds, the sounds heard from the recording in the cockpit were concluded to be sounds similar to mechanical movement in the cockpit, an unintelligible word, and sounds similar to recording tape damage. These are the prelude to silence. At 20:31, the flight data recorder lost power, coinciding with the last recorded radar signal from the aircraft. At 20:31, 12 minutes after departing the JFK airport, TWA Flight 800 imploded. A huge explosion that rained fiery debris across the ocean. The captain of an East Wind Airlines Boeing 737 was the first to report an explosion in the sky. Then the captain of the Singer B flight reported 10 seconds later that he had also just seen an explosion about 16,000 feet ahead of his aircraft, and that an aircraft was just submerged into the ocean. Like clockwork, many air traffic control facilities across New York and Long Island were receiving reports from other pilots of seeing and hearing explosions. Witnesses stated that they heard or saw explosions, and then had seen a large fireball over the ocean, along with a rain of debris, some of which was burning. Around a third of those who had been present at the time of the disaster reported seeing a streak of light, resembling a flare, shoot upwards higher in the sky to the point where a large fireball appeared. Some witnesses also reported seeing the same fireball split into 2 fireballs as it descended towards the waters below. Within minutes of the explosion, Police, military, and civilians swarmed towards the accident site, frantically hoping to save as many lives as they could, but they could not locate a single survivor. Their reactions were swift, so the search and rescuers were hopeful, but no matter how fast their response was, search and rescue efforts could not yield any results. Not this tragedy. It would later be disclosed that this was the second deadliest aviation disaster of its time. Personnel in a helicopter witnessed the explosion from 8 miles away and arrived so quickly that debris was still falling down, so the crew had to retreat. Later, the bodies of the victims were recovered by scuba divers and remotely operated vehicles. The very next morning, the National Transportation Safety Board sent a full team to the accident site to begin an official investigation. Immediately, they got to work trying to determine the cause of the disaster. Also, the FBI was investigating the disaster. They were investigating due to the heavy speculation of a terrorist missile, or such bomb being the cause of the incident. The search and recovery of the aircraft was conducted jointly by federal, state, local agencies, and government contractors. After one of the largest diver-assisted recovery and salvage operations ever completed, 95% of the aircraft wreckage was recovered. The pieces of the wreckage were taken from the waters to the shore by boat, and from the shore to a hangar space at the Grumman Aircraft Facility in Calverton, New York, where it would be examined and reconstructed the best it could. This would act as the headquarters of the investigation. The investigation itself was completed by the NTSB and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but contributing to the investigation were the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, and the FAA. Immediately, great care was taken to examine the aircraft for explosive missiles or fragment remnants. The first evidence to be analyzed was the cockpit voice recording. In the last fraction of a second, a sound was heard that matches the sounds of an aircraft experiencing structural breakups. Structural breakups that include fuel tank explosions. A sound spectrum study of the cockpit voice recording concluded that twice within the last second, the CVR recording captured the captain's channel record harmonic tones at 400 Hz frequency levels, but it did not record other electrical system background noise that it had actually been recording previously throughout the flight. Then, a meteorological analysis was conducted and it was concluded that there were no significant conditions in the area at the time of the accident. There were light winds and scattered clouds in the area, but none severe enough to warrant a disruption of the flight. Next, a medical and pathological test was conducted which all reported negative for all drugs, including abusive, prescription, over-the-counter, or otherwise. There was no evidence to indicate or infer that the crew's performance was affected by pre-existing medical or behavioral conditions. A review of the flight crew confirmed that they were all sufficiently qualified and in possession of the correct certifications. They had been successfully trained and received the off-duty time in accordance with federal regulations. The analysis of the reconstructed aircraft showed that the central fuel tank had imploded, meaning the origin of the explosion within the aircraft itself. Not all victims' bodies were retrieved, however. The analysis of the retrieved victims was consistent with severe in-flight breakup and the following water impact. Injuries and burn patterns, as well as the locations of the bodies, indicate that there was a severe breakup of the passenger cabin early in the breakup sequence. In addition to this, there was a fire propagated in the cabin zone, and the majority of those in said cabin zone were ejected. The small minority of passengers whose bodies exhibited burn injuries suffered surface-level burns that were consistent with an exposure to a flash flame front. Next, the safety board examined all the available radar data, and that examination revealed there was no sequence of primary or secondary radar returns intersecting the Boeing 747's position at the time. What they had confirmed, however, was that Flight 800 did undergo in-flight breakup. On the basis of this initial results of the investigation, investigators had narrowed the facts and had three main theories they took into consideration. The first theory was that the aircraft experienced a structural failure and decompressions. A close examination of the wreckage yielded no evidence of any pre-existing airplane structural faults. There was no fatigue, corrosion, or mechanical damage that could have contributed to the in-flight breakup. Examination did reveal minimal pre-existing corrosion damage. However, it was confirmed that none of the corrosion led to, contributed to, or affected the breakup of the Boeing 747. It was also suggested that the breakup could have been caused by the in-flight separation of the forward cargo door. However, they found that all the door's latches were still securely fastened, ruling out this possibility. Analysis showed no indication of pre-impact failure of the hinge at the top of the door, and evidence points to the door being closed and locked during the time of impact. Given that structural failure and decompressions were unlikely, the investigators then considered the potential of a high-energy explosive device having detonated on board, either a bomb or a missile warhead. There were several factors that led to the belief that either a missile or bomb was the cause of the disaster. That year, there were heightened safety and security concerns caused by the Olympics being held in the U.S. The flight was an international flight, and the sudden, catastrophic nature of the in-flight breakup. Numerous witnesses reported seeing a streak of light and then a fireball, which was believed to be a missile that destroyed the aircraft. Adding to this notion, unexplained radar blips near the flight's path recorded by the Islip radar site added to the mystery. In addition to that, Boeing's design practice that permits parts less than 3 inches long in any direction to be electrically unbonded may not provide adequate protection against potential ignition hazards created by static electricity generated by high-energy discharges. While traces of explosive residue were found on the wreckage, investigators couldn't link them to a bomb or missile due to the absence of corroborating evidence. An exhaustive review of radar data by the safety board found nothing to suggest an external object striking the plane. The FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, FAA, and parties to the investigation thoroughly examined all recovered pieces of the wreckage for evidence of damage characteristic of a bomb, missile, or explosives, and no such evidence was found. Due to this, the safety board concluded that the in-flight breakup of Flight 800 was not initiated by a bomb or missile strike. The final consideration was that there was a fuel-air explosion in the center wing fuel tank. From the wreckage recovery locations, investigators were able to determine that the first pieces of the aircraft to break off were from the area in and around the center wing section, including the center wing tank, and that the breakup was initiated in this area. A computer simulation, mirroring the flight's conditions, showed that a spark could ignite flammable vapors in the tank, creating enough pressure to tear the tank apart. This spark likely came through the plane's fuel quantity indication system wiring, possibly exacerbated by chemical deposits that can enhance electrical conductivity. However, the exact source of the spark remains undetermined due to the complexity of the evidence. At the time of the disaster, conditions within the central wing fuel tank were perfect for such an explosion, which was powerful enough to cause the catastrophic damage observed. The safety board concluded that a fuel-air explosion in the central wing tank of Flight 800 was responsible for the disaster. This conclusion was reached after considering the breakup sequence, wreckage damage characteristics, scientific tests, research on fuels, fuel tank explosions, and the conditions in the central wing tank at the time of the disaster. This conclusion also clarified that the streak of light seen by witnesses was not a missile, but fuel burning from the damaged aircraft, dispelling other theories about the tragedy's cause. Ultimately, the safety board's conclusion was that the aviation disaster was not survivable, which was reflected in the fact that there was not a single survivor of the tragedy. There were challenges in investigating the disaster, including the perception errors of the varying witness accounts, the need to piece together thousands of aircraft fragments, the extensive damage to the aircraft, and the exact sequence of events not being able to be determined due to lack of and damage to evidence. Due to these reasons, the conclusion reached by the safety board was not proven or confirmed, but deemed the most likely. The crew's performance and the meteorological conditions of the time did not contribute in any capacity to the accident, and all claims of terrorist missiles and bombs were put to rest. In response to the tragedy, the NTSB issued 15 safety recommendations to be made, and modifications would be made onto aircraft design, fuel tank systems, and safety protocols. Regulations were reviewed and guidelines were implemented, leaving a long-term positive impact on aviation procedure that would act as Flight 800's legacy, as well as marking the incident's effect on the aviation community. Public perception of the conclusions reached by the safety board remained negative. However, the safety board stands firm on their stance to this day. 230 people died, and an aircraft was destroyed. Families were broken, and a nation grieving. The tragedy that is Flight 800 changed the course of aviation history. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and check out our channel for more videos on aviation disasters.